So in accordance with Governor Baker's orders, as we all know, that order was extended and we're meeting by Zoom today. This meeting is not open to the public for physical attendance, but is posted and people can join the Zoom. It doesn't look like, I can't tell if we have, do we have any attendees? We do have one attendee.
That's Nikki, and I'm promoting her right now.
Oh, okay. So just for the record, if any attendees do join and they want to ask questions, please do so through the Q&A and state your address for our minutes. And I'll just go around and if you could just say that you're here. Nancy DeLuca.
Oh. Here.
Patrick Helen. He's here.
Here.
Mark Lamb.
Here.
Rory Calfouts.
Here.
Alicia Cabral.
Here.
Jennifer Carlino.
Here.
Wayne Beitler.
Here.
Michael Blanchard.
Here.
Justin Alexander.
Here.
Nikki D'Stumian.
Here.
Stephanie Danielson.
Here.
And Dottie Fulgenetti is here also. So the first thing we want to do is accept the minutes from the February 3rd meeting. If everyone's had a chance to take a look at those, I'd take a motion and a second.
Move to
I'll
accept
make a motion to approve the meetings, minutes of the meeting for February 3rd.
Second.
Who said second?
Patrick.
Oh, okay, Patrick second. And all in favor? Any
Aye.
opposed? None opposed, so that's a unanimous vote. So the next item is to review a summary of Massworks and the Housing Choice Initiative grants. Stephanie sent some information on that, I think this morning.
I did,
so
yeah.
You want to go through that, Stephanie?
Yes, the board asked at the last meeting to see a list of this. Members also asked for kind of a rundown of the benefits. I will talk about that in a minute. What you can see is beginning in 2011 up through, and I included the Complete Streets funding grant that we just received this year, because I would imagine, we heard at the last meeting that the state is thinking about tying other grants to compliance for MBTA communities. It may not be that you're not eligible, but that you will be given a preference or a lower status if you're not compliant with the grant. And Complete Streets is one that is centric around transit and mobility. So I added that in. The total amount we've received over the last 10 years is almost $5 million. It's 4.95. And I detailed what grant program it was, the amount that we received, the location that the money was targeted to within town, and also the project. And some of the benefits that we can immediately see, I think everyone appreciates that the downtown area, the revitalization there, and it's really a thriving location, not only for Easton residents, but there's a regional draw to the new restaurants there and the activity there. One of the things I was asked to point out is that Avalon alone, which certainly helped drive the ability to sewer the whole Foundry district. And, last 2 years ago, we were awarded a Massworks grant and $1.5 million to complete the sewer project, in addition to the $225,000 Housing Choice Capital Grant that helped with the design work for that. But they are now contributing around $844,000 a year in annual tax revenue. So that's kind of a very tangible. And, we have proposed.
I was just going to add to that about Avalon. Every place that we've had successful economic development, there's been a housing component that has catalyzed that or tied that. So we had to, put sewer in different parts of town. And by bringing Avalon on and the impact fees that they paid, we were able to catalyze and accelerate that sewer development, but also be able to get a diff in that area, you know, that would have lowered the tax burden or the burden on the betterments for the people in that community. So that whole piece of tying the economic development to the housing, the same thing in the downtown. We would, if people have been here long enough and they remember, there were tumbleweeds blowing down the downtown because there was no restaurants there. Everything was closed up until we overbuilt the capacity of the shovel works to bring that sewer to the downtown. And now that whole area is thriving. Property values have increased. It drew other incentives like the trustees of reservation to preserve that open space and other new business opportunities. So just want to kind of add that in as a tangible benefit as well.
If I could also add to that, Dottie. So one thing this doesn't quantify is it's unquantifiable future development that those areas can receive because of these grants. So in every single one of those zones, they're not fully built out. They're not at capacity. They're not even close. So we haven't captured that yet. It's unquantifiable, but it will become real. I don't know how long it'll take. Hopefully not too long, maybe a decade or so. But all these efforts are, you know, we benefit in the future, which is really important to point out. The revenue from it, the development of it. And I do have a quick question, Stephanie. So on this Word document that you sent, a couple of these were amended from like 1 million to 4K. Why were they amended?
In the instance of the first grant, no, I'm sorry, the second grant, the Belmont Street and Washington Street intersection improvements, that was tied to the Queeset Commons 40R project and the developers agreement. Doug King is responsible. He is actually responsible for that intersection improvement. He thought he was going to be able to proceed with that back in 2013. We received the Massworks grant in the amount of $1 million. And then Doug realized he really needed to wait until he had more of the development done at the 40R project. So we worked with the state rather than relinquish those funds. We were able to work with the state to come up with a project where the crosswalk and the crosswalk signaling at Roosevelt Circle. So leaving Queeset Commons going over to Stonehill across the street so people could walk to Stonehill and vice versa. People could come from Stonehill and cross over there safely. So we were awarded the $1 million. Right. I think it's important to focus on that you can see the pattern. Yeah, where Easton, because of our ability to actually move forward on these projects or modify them, and that's the same. So the 2017 one was for the Main Street undergrounding and the remainder of the work, the roadway work with the sidewalks and the new crosswalk. That was dependent on the developer being able to get the easements so that we could do the undergrounding work there. And unfortunately, that just didn't materialize. So we were able to work with the state and reduce the amount for the project to 1.5 million and modify the project. And that work's been completed. So you've seen the sidewalk, the crosswalks were improved. We have the speed bumps, the speed tables. They are now, which were requested by the businesses in the area because people were going by, driving very quickly. It's really helped slow traffic. And an additional crosswalk was added that was asked for by the businesses in the district.
Okay, so the reason why I asked and wanted to point it out was if you look at what we have in these zones, that's actually only $3 million worth of grants, although we were awarded $5 million. So I don't want people to look at these areas and say that's what 5 million gets you.
Yes.
You actually could have got more. The stars just didn't align with the developer, you know, through powers that they didn't have or whatever. But $5 million actually would have got us more. So I think that needs to be pointed out.
Yeah.
For obvious reasons.
Yeah. And I just wanted to talk about, especially in the Five Corners district or Furnace Village district, So new development that we've seen there since the sewer went in is the Starbucks over by Highland Plaza. And there is a new coffee shop that is going in in that area, kind of that plaza area where McGuire's is. We also are in permitting, the permitting process for the redevelopment of the Belcher Foundry site. And there is a proposal that's being reviewed by the planning board for a 20-unit subdivision on South Street. And South Street was always part of the DIF district and was voted into the sewer district. I think it was last May's town meeting.
So any questions or comments on this? Okay. Moving on to the next agenda item is to review the draft action plan. So Stephanie and Wayne did a great job putting together these steps and organizing it with what our approach will be and the start dates and the end dates. Do you want to talk about that, Stephanie, specifically?
Sure. And just bear with me a minute. I had all my documents ordered. That one. I just have to find it. There we go. Do people want me to share my screen as we go through it?
Please.
Okay, I see some heads nodding. And can everyone see that now?
Yes.
Okay. So I started this, one of the requirements for compliance is that the towns develop an action plan that outlines how you're going to achieve developing your multifamily overlay district and the timeline as well as milestones. So approaching it from that, I started with the tasks that are already underway or that we've completed. And then I went to the timeline for understanding what it takes to get zoning articles to town meeting. I went to the items that are at the bottom and then we filled in the middle. So interim compliance is basically already complete. We had the select board briefing on the 24th of January. And on the 15th, I submitted the interim compliance form to the state. We developed an approach to complying with 3A that was establishing the task force, setting the meeting schedule, and then what we'll be doing today and possibly at the next meeting is identifying the possible areas for the district, submitting a draft of the comments and questions on the draft guidance to the select board, and then submitting those comments by the end of March. Developing the action plan I put in there, and you can see I have as a target date of finalizing the plan and submitting to DHCD because that's one of the requirements. They need to approve it by the 31st. Then defining the potential zoning districts, which we will start today. Determining the geographical locations, establishing guiding principles and values, such as affordability and walkability, making sure that these are neighborhood type areas that reflect the principles that the town has been working on in the zoning over the last couple of years. Mixed use, developing concepts for each section of the proposed district that will help guide the actual written component of the zoning. And then assessing the capacity to meet density requirements and other desired outcomes. A critical component of the action plan is the public outreach, involving the public, getting feedback. So one of the things we've been talking about is creating an informative web page for people, letting them know what's happening. It'll be a place that drafts can be posted and we can receive comments on. also having an actual public, at least one, if not more, public input sessions on the first draft. And then once receiving input from the public, of course, we would consider and incorporate those comments into the draft.
Stephanie, sorry to interrupt you. Connor's in the waiting room.
Oh,
You have a chance to
sorry.
look him over?
That must
Nope,
be
you just got it. Thanks.
That must be the text I just received. All right, hold on, I have to figure out how to get to participants. There we go. Okay. And you'll see this section doesn't have dates. That's what we need, one of the things we need to go over today, just what's practical in setting these dates. Once we've modified and revised the district, then there'll be a final potential district, which will be presented to the select board and the zoning board. You'll see I've also identified responsible parties for these activities. Then the actual zoning itself will be drafted. There'll be a hearing. The draft will be finalized. There'll be a final public hearing on the zoning, and then the article would be presented to town meeting for vote. And then the final is that, and the end date on that should actually be 90 days out, but the final activity is submitting the request for determination of compliance to the DHCD.
So that's great. I think it's going to be very helpful to have that timeline, other than the fact that it is required. But I think that to do this early on like this gives us a good idea of the flow of how this will work. Every step towards organizing this a little bit more makes it a little bit less intimidating, I think. Some communities are really struggling with this. It just seems like a lot to undertake. So to have a task force that does this is really helpful. So I appreciate you doing that, Stephanie and Wayne. Any comments or questions on the action plan? Okay. All right, now we're going to get to the good stuff.
No, I had one
Yeah,
question.
Dottie, I think there's a couple.
Jen, I didn't see that. Go ahead.
Stephanie, did you want to add a public survey to the outreach? If we came up with questions, I'm happy to put that together for you. For
And
us.
who is that talking? Is that Jen?
Jen, yep.
I think that sounds like a good idea. Does the board agree? The
Yes.
team?
Yeah.
Add that. I'm not going to hold this up by adding it real time, but I will put it in my public survey. And Jen, thank you for offering to put it together.
Any other comments, questions?
Yeah, so first, I apologize for being late, but I just want to clarify, there's a kind of big burst of activity and requirements we have to get done seemingly by the end of this March, but then the actual requirement to adopt zoning is more than a year out. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay, I just want to clarify that.
yes, yeah. And I will fill in the dates, Connor. I just wanted to make sure everyone was comfortable with the action items, and then we'll fill in the dates. And again, I explained before you joined us that how I started this was I started with the action items that are already underway and that we know are going to happen over the next month and a half, and those dates, and then backed up from the steps that we need to get to for town meeting, and then we'll fill in the dates from there.
Just one other
Thanks.
question, if I could. It seems to me in reading the materials and watching the webinar that Senator Keneally did last week, that there's an opportunity to get DHCD's feedback during this process. Is that built in here? Because
No, thank you.
because I think that before we go to town meeting for a vote, we want to make sure that with some certainty that DHCD is approving of our plan. So.
Rory, thank you. That's a really good point. And it was, when I was thinking about the action plan, it's something I thought of and missed. So we will add that in too.
And also on March 1st, Mass Housing Partnership is going to be taking applications for technical assistance. And they're looking at that in terms of communities that are really digging into this and serious about it and putting in the work, or communities that work together to do that. So I was on a presentation for that the other day, and it looks like they're going to have some great support for communities like Easton on the technical support. We'll probably need that in drafting the zoning bylaws and things like that. So
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Dottie, because I really do think that we want to take advantage of that technical assistance, both in, we're expecting that they'll have a template ordinance or bylaw that we can work from, but also in making sure and customizing it for Easton. And again, making sure it hits on the points with DHCD, and then also doing the capacity assessment and really planning that out. I think we may have the ability to do that, but if technical assistance is being provided, it certainly will take some of the pressure off staff and the team.
excellent. Any other comments and questions? All right. Now on to the good stuff, the maps. Stephanie and Wayne put together these maps of different areas, starting with areas that we already have housing and where could we expand upon that to be able to meet some of the requirements. And that we got that in our packet, but Stephanie will share the screen.
Okay, so we started with, and how does this work for people? Do I need to zoom out? Can everybody see that well? Okay, thank you, Jen. We started with the area that had the largest existing multifamily development, which is Avalon, as you can see right here in the purple. And I want to thank Greg Strange. He helped provide a lot of this information. And if we, across the board, if we wanted to get, just go with the minimal amount, this purple area would represent that. And as I go through the maps, you'll see that purple areas are existing development that has some potential for additional development. And if we collated these together, we would probably be able to meet the requirement. We're also proposing that you look at a broader area and consider, again, mixed use in those districts, because looking at the density and the capacity, you could have just an area that's strictly the multifamily housing at the density that's required, plus the additional 10% that the town needs to meet. But they're also saying you could have mixed use, you could have affordable units. So it probably makes sense to look at slightly larger areas or larger areas and have that zoning cover a larger district. So this is reflecting within the Foundry Eastman Street area, where the existing multifamily, if you zoned it such, could be expanded.
And Stephanie, just to add to that, I think one of the things that's challenging with these is in the mind of a planner, and the way that we have to look at it is we have to think about what's this going to look like in 10, 20, 30, 50 years. So we're really reimagining certain areas of town to a way that we might not even have a concept of what could be done in 30 years, for instance. Like, our strip mall still going to be a big deal, or we see in some areas where those are being redeveloped to have mixes of housing and things like that, or incorporate open space to create new villages. Or if we're looking at an area because we're limited on sewer capacity and we think, well, geez, if we did that overlay for by right, they would have to still meet the sewer requirements and the septic requirements for that. But maybe in 30 years, somebody invents some new way to do it that could take care of a certain amount of property. So that's really what we're looking at, is the capacity, not necessarily that in the next, couple of years, anything's going to happen to them. But, so suppose, Bank of Easton on that area didn't want to keep their office anymore and they sold it, there could be development there. So thinking of what's there that could be potentially redeveloped if that's what the owners of the property wanted to do down the road.
Okay, I just did, okay. I also want to point out that we've identified these areas as wetlands, and that includes the buffer zone. Now, these areas are based on the Mass GIS data layer. For wetlands, it's not definitive, so the wetland could be a bit bigger, but it does give us an idea of the restraints. And what you can see is generally, we think this area here might be dry, but the district generally is outside of wetland areas, if based on those maps at this point in time.
Stephanie, just to make sure I understand, and if this was discussed in the first meeting, I apologize. Are we thinking overlay districts for this, or?
The Easton will have, so that's an interesting question, because what DHCD has said is that towns can, the district can comprise multiple areas, and they refer to those as overlay districts. I think the underlying zoning, though, still, I don't think it's like what we think of as typically an overlay district. Like the compact neighborhood overlay district allows denser development if someone chooses to take advantage of that overlay district. However, the underlying zoning remains in effect. In this case, I don't think that would be the case, because then your district, and this is a question we do need to get answered. The underlying district would be across Easton right now, let's say, looking at the current zoning, wouldn't allow by right the density that is mandated by 3A.
Right.
So, but we
Right.
are, so that's, they refer to them as overlay districts, but are we thinking that our district will comprise different areas? Yes, in order to meet the full 50 acres.
Right. So what, I guess the motivator to my question is, if, and correct me if my understanding is wrong, if it's an overlay district, then you basically have the base district layer where those commercial properties, because that's what many of these are still compliant. Because what I would be concerned with is if we had to change the zoning, the kind of base layer zoning, it would be really unfortunate for, I mean, this is one of the most commercially dense intersections we have, and we don't have a lot of commercial property already. If, in order to comply with this new 3A zoning, if we had to change the base zoning layer and effectively rendered all of these large commercial parcels as pre-existing non-conforming, that would be, in my view, not in the town's advantage, because then that effectively guarantees over time, or makes significantly more likely over time, that absent the existing tenant, that will no longer be commercial. I mean, I suppose they could go through a ZBA and a variance process, but I just would. Yep.
The district can include mixed use, so it can include a commercial component, and that would be where trying to figure out what that is. I understand what you're saying.
Sure, thank you. And then one more question, and then I'll stop my commentary. So 92 is the acreage of the green.
Yes.
Okay, and the mandate is 18 units per acre.
It's essentially with the 10%.
So if that were the case, this would actually bring us into full compliance with just this one, wouldn't it?
That's what I was going to ask.
No,
How
you
many of
need
these
50
actually would have
acres.
to be concurrent?
You need 50 acres in total, so we'd still need an additional 24.25 acres
Well, but I
Right.
thought the green parcels are 92 acres.
Oh, you mean this?
Yeah, if we did the whole,
Yes.
if we did this whole thing,
Yes.
that would be
Yes.
almost 1,700 unit potential.
Yes.
Okay,
So that's what I was going to ask. It's similar to Connor, like as we're looking through these different maps, the idea is obviously we have the goal of how many we have to get. It's not a matter of here's all of them. It's a matter of we're going to be picking and choosing to get to that final total. So this is the full map of all the potential areas.
Right.
And obviously when we get down to the actual brass tacks of it, it could be a minimal combination of multiple, or just obviously overloading. Like to Connor's point, we could do this. If this was the sufficient draw, then we could get all the acreage we needed here.
Right. Exactly. And I probably should have said that.
I honestly, I had forgotten what the total goal was, like what the actual total number of acres and units we had to get to. So I was going to ask that question, and then Connor did it more succinctly than I could.
Yeah. So it's 50 acres that can accommodate a minimum density of 15 units per acre, but the whole district has to be able to support 913 units in total.
Awesome.
One other question here. Sorry, Wayne had his hand raised if he wants to go first.
Yeah, the one thing I was going to say is in talking with several other folks, including some members of the Affordable Housing Trust and with Stephanie, is starting out with a sort of wide lens on a variety of locations with the concept of walkable, mixed income, mixed use neighborhood centers as sort of a larger framework for consideration and planning. So as the group and then the larger public goes through this exercise, it may be that there is an interest in sort of exceeding, a 50-acre minimum. Trying to sort of use this process as building on Easton's history in the last decade or two of really trying to foster these sorts of mixed use, mixed income, walkable neighborhood centers. And, can we factor this zoning change into that goal?
So I think just to another thing that as we're looking at this, and I don't know, and this is a question that I don't have the answer to, that we sort of touched on last time, was that if the South Coast Rail comes through Easton, do we have to then conform to the half a mile within the within distance of the rail stations component of this requirement? So we may need to think about this, is that if South Coast Rail is coming through, where the proposed stations are, do we need to be within a half a mile? Those were like the Eastman Street probably won't be within a half a mile of a rail station.
Right. And I'm looking, and Wayne, I think we did forget a map, but I can show it on my GIS. So let me just go up to Roach Brothers Plaza, because Rory, to answer that question, if we include in the zone, let me just bear with me. I'm guessing everyone can now see my GIS map that's moving around.
No.
No, you have to stop sharing and then
Okay,
share
and then
again.
change it. Okay. So share. Hold on while I go up here.
We see it now. Thank you.
Thank you. Washington Street should be turned on. This is a little busy. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to turn just bear with me. I want to make this up. Okay. So can everyone see this well? Roach Brothers Way is here. Washington Street. This is the north end, the northeast end of town. This is where one of the train stations is proposed for Easton if South Coast Rail should come through. This is commercial development. Right here, we have some condominiums, but there looks to be some room for expansion or redevelopment over time. And again, the town doesn't have to develop it out. It just has the capability to develop it, just has to exist. So this is an area that would seem to make sense to designate because it would be within the half mile of a transit station if the South Coast Rail does come through.
But to Rory's point, is there a clearer answer? If in 10 years we do, or however many years we do have a train coming through town, will we then have to accommodate being an MBTA community as opposed to an adjacent community? And some of the areas we've chosen become irrelevant and we now have to go back to the drawing board and start developing areas closer.
And Dottie can jump in here. She's been at a lot of probably more of the training
I think
sessions.
it's okay if we don't have an answer. I just think we definitely need clarification.
Well, I think you're right. What I am hearing and how I understand the way it's written today, even for current MBTA communities with transit stations, is that at least a portion of your district needs to be located within a half mile, not that the whole district. But I'm misunderstanding.
Communities or MBTA communities?
MBTA communities, not MBTA adjacent. But Dottie, do you? And yeah, we can certainly, that's a good question.
Yeah, and they are anticipating that should that change, we would have to conform to those requirements in that area, which is why it makes sense to have this as one of the options, even if that's, you know, not something that we plan right now, but we're thinking about that in the planning process. And that would also mean that our number goes up from the 900 that we have to have zone for. So,
like, if we can create this as such that we are an MBTA community, in anticipation, we know what where the rail lines are. I think that would be very smart if it's an option. And I think it is. I mean, just looking at this map right here, it seems to be, you know, an option.
well, when we go through all the maps and we think about those, we're not gonna, every map that Stephanie has, we're not gonna be including that or picking that for this part of it. But that will be how we prioritize what we, you know, what areas we do. So this is definitely, you know, this is definitely something to consider in that as well. And, you know, also aside from trying to meet the goals of this guidance, it's also going to help us kind of, we always need to be looking at, you know, down the road, if there is development, what are the areas? So this is a good exercise, even though we're not going to select every single one of these.
Yeah.
At least there's a pathway for the future. And this is in conjunction with the planning board identifying these sites. It's kind of like almost a little revision on the master plan, I feel like.
Yeah. And then I'm just going to take a kind of different turn on this. So this might be one of the comments that the town provides to the guidance. And how I'm thinking about this is that the comment would be that if an MBTA adjacent community that has the potential to become an MBTA community in the future develops the district such that it includes a portion in within what is anticipated to be a station within the 0.5 miles, that they would not need to because this is what I think I'm hearing from Rory, is that would we have to designate the entire district within a half mile? So I think the comment is that you'd want assurance that as long as a portion, if you were determined to be an MBTA station in the future, that at least a portion of your district was within the half mile, that you wouldn't have to rezone the other areas of your district.
Yeah, I think that's a great question to include.
So I've just highlighted that as one of our comments.
Connor's waiting patiently with his hand raised.
So I think it's worth us thinking about, you know, you look at this area in your Roach Brothers, that we know there are certain things we know we have to do right now, which is to come up with enough space to have the 913 units capacity. I think that we would be well suited to prioritize these districts, the 914 or 13 units, not using this area yet, because if we do ever have the train come through, we're not only going to need to meet the half-mile requirement, we'll need additional units. And so if we bake this into our 913 now, and then the train is coming through, at that point, we're going to have to go back and identify areas that are not near that infrastructure. So I think to the extent we can, if there are places that are not all the way up there, it would make sense to prioritize those. If for no other reason, then that's the northernmost boundary of the town. That would be a major service strain to reach up there. And I think it would be wise for us to kind of hold on to that as something that we could adopt on top of a base 913 if we ever do see the train.
Connor, can I ask you, I just want some clarification. If that's what you're suggesting, are you also suggesting that if we do become an MBTA community, that these units or this area will not count towards it? And when we shift into that other?
No, what I'm trying to say is that we need to, even without the MBTA in Easton as an adjacent community, we have to do the 10% of our housing stock threshold. So that's 913 units. If we become a community that has train in it, not only do you need to have some of this zoning within a half mile, which Stephanie made a good point, we'll clarify how much of it, that percentage increases, Stephanie, I think to what, either 15 or 25%?
15% for Easton.
Okay, so we would need to come up with 460 additional unit capacity. So that's why I'm saying I would rather not kind of expend that potential up here absent the train.
Yep.
So that you kind of keep
without
it in your
that piece. Without that piece of going from 10 to 15%, you were not making sense to me.
Sure, yeah, I apologize.
But now that that's clarified, it does make sense.
Yeah, so in shorthand, the other areas of town should accommodate the 913.
Right.
And this should be kept in reserve for.
But as reserve, would we still zone it in this process to have that ease of, like to Mark's point, are we greasing the rails now to provide for that if that does occur, or do we have to go back to the drawing board in that 10-year time?
I think the real question there, and Connor just answered part of it, is would this be an area that would be desirable for multi-family zoning over the next many years? I think part of the answer is, so it's not sewered, so you'd have to have all on-site septic. It would have to be able to accommodate that. It is closer to the Stoughton train station that currently exists, so it's somewhat transit centric. I think it's a mile from here. But so I think the real question, because otherwise you can or not. I think
and you can also do a portion.
Well, I think something that we should also be keeping in mind is that this Easton, I think, will fare a lot better than a lot of communities impacted by this new rule, because we've been relatively progressive with housing policy and planning. We are still looking at the prospect of going to town meeting and implementing zoning that is significantly more dense and pro-development than anything Easton has, just to do the 913. So I think complying will already be a lot of explaining and a lot of work to say we're going to future-proof just in case and add another 400 plus might make that more politically challenging. I mean, we of course can and should explore that over time, but that would be my kind of concern.
To that point too, it's there's no stopping the if you zone it, they will come aspect of this, which to Connor's earlier point, if there's a holdover, right? If we're future proofing and we're saying at some point in time, if the MBTA station arrives, we have this area that has not been zoned and or developed that we can then obviously backfill that capacity as needed, versus to Stephanie's point, it is, I mean, I live right here, right? So it's like, it's not far from me. it's a great spot to have that easy commute to the Stoughton T. So it's like, yeah, if you put that zoning out there, does someone come in and immediately say, this is a good spot, and essentially disrupt the potential holdover or reserve, I guess you'd call it, for that potential expansion? Another consideration to keep in mind.
Absolutely.
So if it's zoned, by right, and we already zoned it for that, I feel like, I mean, we would already be in compliance for the majority of, should that come in. So I think we could take this offline and bat it around a little bit more. Because I want to be cognizant of time.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
over
we could,
10.
yeah.
I want to just kind of go through the rest of them, but let's table this discussion because I think it's an important discussion and we should definitely get some clarification on that, because the way I'm looking at it is, if that was already zoned by right, we would check the box off, and it's the by right part of it. Communities can go to them if they already have zoning by right and get acceptance of that. They're not being required to build more on top of it.
Okay, so the next district, that, again, these are potential, and that's kind of a good point. I didn't expect that the team would say, okay, at the end of today and going through these, that these are the districts and this is it, that, there would be a lot more discussion. This is the depots. This is actually the actual Five Corners area. This is the Shaw's Plaza right here. This is the assisted living facility. It's an area that was just recently rezoned for mixed use and denser development, more multifamily development by right, actually by special permit. So again, this is really, it's just an area that would seem prime if the Shaw's area was ever redeveloped, and it would be a walkable neighborhood, especially with the new sidewalks up along Depot Street, things happening. Comments, thoughts? Okay, we'll move to the next one. Queeset Commons is a 40R district. I think one of the questions here, Dottie, we're going to need to ask is, can you overlay your 40R district, because it already has overlay zoning? This has a development plan, so that has been approved by the state. And the real question would be, can you add zoning to this? Right now, the way this works, as I was explaining earlier, this 40R district is an actual overlay district. So the underlying zoning, which would be business and residential in this area, remains in effect. So if this site were ever redeveloped and someone wanted to, say today, for some reason, come in and redevelop this under the underlying existing zoning, they could do that. So the question is, how would that be affected by this? Does the multifamily, the MBTA multifamily by right zoning become the underlying zoning? And right now, I think the 24, we have some density there already.
And on some of the meetings that I've been on, I've heard that come up as a question. So I think other communities are going to ask that. And another one is, how does a historic district also, how does that interact with this as well? So that'll be a question that comes up.
Right, which is a good lead in for the Shovel Works area. Right now, the Shovel Works area looks like it complies with the zoning. It has a 15-acre right units per acre. That's out to Wayne to prove me on that. So
I think it's a little bit under, it's like 13 when you look
Okay.
at the actual, but fairly close.
Yeah, and so you could just include that as part of your district. We outlined just as potential, but this really goes to the question of historical districts, because portion of this area is part of the Ames Local Historic District. And also the way this has developed over time really has that town center feel and characteristic of Easton. And do you really, you know, the new village business district zoning does allow some additional mixed use zoning at a higher density level than the current residential zoning does. So that's just put out there as something to think about. This is Washington and Main Street. Currently, we have this 40B development here. There are 39 units. And if you just included that, that's 2.82 acres, including this area here, which is part of the Marshall Farm property. But these areas here could be included in a district, and you'd have 41 acres there. And the fact that this isn't included was just a Scribner's error on my part. And those are the suggested areas for consideration.
Stephanie, could you update this packet to include the Roach Brothers one so that it's all?
Yes, yes, I plan, yes,
I looked away for a minute. Did you cover Queesit?
we did.
Okay.
That was right here.
So I think the plan is for us to all look at this a little bit, kind of digest it. It would be really great if at some point we could put these up and do it in a room and, you know, look at it together, depending on what the COVID status is over the next couple of months. But I think this is a really great first start.
Absolutely is. Quick question on Queesit. Why doesn't it extend farther down? Like towards Marketplace, towards Wendy?
I think probably for the similar reason that Connor was talking about Eastman and Foundry Street, that's right now it is zoned to allow mixed use and by special permit, and I don't have it here, so I'm not. And that it is really an area that people have talked a lot about being a commercial center. I mean, you could include that for consideration.
But if we do that, we're going to lose the commercial area that we're trying to develop for business,
Right,
economic
right.
development.
It's worth the question. I need to be able to answer these questions when people ask me, you know?
Yep, no, they're good
I don't have all
questions.
the answers.
All right, looks like Wayne has,
One thing that I'm sort of trying to synthesize some of the comments I'm hearing, and one of the things I'm hearing is, and maybe it's just reflecting something I'm very interested in, is I would really enjoy or appreciate some sort of technical assistance in gaming out scenarios. I mean, it seems like for most of these considerations, the group is pretty interested in mixed use commercial and residential. But how do you practically actually accommodate that? And can you hit your density targets? Can you hit your parking? Is it actually financeable, for developers to do this? Because the obvious targets for all this are, commercial plazas, and to Connor's point, another, we do not want to blow up our commercial properties. So that seems like a pretty significant priority in getting some technical assistance on how you would actually game out some of these scenarios.
An excellent point.
I do think that one of the things that they were talking about in some of the presentations is that you have to be careful about your parking requirements on some of these projects, because that's the whole point, is that they want to decrease the amount of transportation that's required, personal transportation that's required. So they don't want to discourage that. So it's one of the challenges here. It's a climate change, adherence here that we're talking about, mitigation that's going on here. So.
mm-hmm.
And I think those are both great points. And one of the things that's going to get borne out in the technical analysis is I think we're going to bump into limits to sewer capacity quite quickly in some of these areas. So, I'll start a conversation with Mansfield about the regional plant and what capacity there is, in the next 5-10-year window. When we built Queesit Sewer in Five Corners, there is excess capacity available, but we did not anticipate this level of density being made by right. So that's going to be something very important in that technical analysis as well.
Great. So we are at 9:56. Talk about a group that shows up on time and gets the work done. So I appreciate everybody being here. It's an early meeting and I know people have jobs and make sacrifices to be here. So thank you very much. Is there any other comments or questions before we wrap up? All right, our next meeting is going to be March 3rd at 9 a.m. And if somebody would like to make a motion to adjourn,
So moved.
Mark
Second.
and Rory second. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Okay. Have a great day, everybody, and see you on March 3rd.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.